All right, well, hello everyone. I'm really glad that you joined me today. And I'm here to say something that will probably appall all of you as journalists in the room. Facts don't matter, not anymore. That's probably the sound of Longenau fainting. So we're at an era where traditional news media, no matter how truthful or not so much, is just no longer enough to get the message to wider audiences. News is moving away from television and onto the internet. Not only is it doing that, but news delivered by professional, well-dressed, stuffy old people just doesn't get across to our generation. And also, of course, there's the ever-present question of how do we deliver deep, complex stories in concise packages that can get information across quickly, accurately, and effectively. All of this has led to a new era of journalism where people just don't seem to care if your news isn't made interesting. This era some have taken to calling a post-fact era. The phrase post-fact era was coined by conservative speaker and free speech advocate Milo Yiannopoulos in an interview with Bloomberg magazine. As he stated, "We live in a post-fact era. It's wonderful. The Washington Post can give a truth check and no one cares. Now you have to use the truth and other strategies. You have to be persuasive." Has anyone ever been genuinely excited to listen to bland and dry information like you're reading out of a government handbook? Probably not unless you're talking to Ben Stein. But journalism has the role of delivering information accurately, but not at the expense of audience engagement. And making news exciting does not have to come at the expense of accuracy. So now let's not get this wrong or jump to conclusions on what a post-fact era sounds like it implies. It does not mean having no facts and just making up stories as we go. It does not mean fake news, which is intentionally misleading news. It's not purely entertainment or injecting irrelevant news stories into like a full comedy routine. And it doesn't sacrifice any ethics of journalism, like truth and human dignity. A better way to interpret this would be weaving in a message with humor. No one can resist the truth wrapped in a good joke, as Milo himself said. I mean, did you know that a black adult is more likely to be struck by lightning than shot by police? Yeah, 1 in 8,500 to 1 in 3,000. Seriously. But nobody's protesting thunderstorms. So comedy and sketches and other creative means are fantastic ways to get news across, so use them. Then lastly, a wildly unpopular thing to suggest, but be open about bias. All media is biased. No human is free from bias. It shapes everything we do. And as journalists, no matter how slight, it will change how we report on news. So instead of shying away from it, however, news could be made better if those reporting it make their biases clear. So going deeper into this wild, crazy concept of acceptable bias. Like I said previously, all media being biased because people are biased. Until we invent the Journalism Bot 4000, we will not be able to separate human experiences that influence our news. Taking it even out of the partisan example that I know everyone's mind probably went to, thanks 2016, I'm a gamer. I really like video games. Because of that, if I were to write an article for a business magazine about video games, I would have a different approach than a financial officer or an investor, because I'm personally involved in it and I have feelings about this industry in a different way. So while an industry professional might write about projected quarterly sales and revenue, I would be able to provide insight about the gaming community that could help make business decisions. So instead of striving for the impossible and ending up with this feeling every time we go to read a news story, if places were just open and honest about their bias, readers could be fully aware of the viewpoints that they're getting. So something I'd like to do is go into these the faces and some of the people that are involved in and using these post-fact era strategies to draw in their audiences. Most of them are YouTubers, some of them are Instagram accounts, but they're places that people do get their news from, and why are people tuning into these people by their hundreds of thousands into the millions. So I tried to be as balanced as possible, found some from the left, found some from the right, and some that aren't even political. So from the left, there's the Young Turks, who were founded by Cenk Uygur, and they've attracted an audience of 3.5 million subscribers. Their news style, they focus on topics that are highly relevant to our younger generation like ours. And they have lively hosts like Cenk and Anna Kasparian. They're the largest strictly online news show in the world, and they have so many channels within their network. Someone who's less news but more personalities, Lacey Green. Don't know if anyone who's heard of her, but she has 1.5 million subscribers to a channel that she started with discussing sex education for weirded out teenagers, but then moved on to social political activism. Her bubbly personality and her disarming approach has garnered her a lot of popularity, and recently she's been kind of under attack for doing something that is just unbelievable. She's started to ask questions and hold discussions with people of different ideologies from hers. Crazy. Someone who's more central and less political is someone I follow called Tank's Good News. It's an Instagram account with nearly 600,000 followers. Tank's Good News shares positive, uplifting news stories from around the web. Most of the stories are from smaller local papers from around the world. But his mission is to remind people that there's still plenty of good left in humanity. He tackles a niche that I think we all want to see covered, and that's good news. These are stories that bring people together, make us forget our parties, our ideologies, and for just a second, and crack a smile or laugh or even cry a little bit with tears of joy. There needs to always be a place for good news, and that place needs to be much more prominent than it is now. Then, for those who are more right of center, there's Steven Crowder, who's a Christian conservative podcast host. He offers unique analysis of trending news and pop culture through a lens of comedy. He has a series of videos called Change My Mind, where he goes out to public, sits down with a sign that says his stance on a social or political issue, and then just says, change my mind. This is kind of like a man on the street journalism, but with, to get discussion going. And it gives you the facts of both sides as you're hearing these people who come up and want to have civil discussion and debate. Another one of his more popular series is Undercover, where he goes in with disguises and hidden cameras to organizations, to places, to see what people are doing when they don't know that they're on camera. And he's uncovered a lot of very interesting information. He's gotten in some dangerous situations, but it's kind of a lost art of journalism. The whole thing like the jungle going into and watchdogging for places that just don't know that they're being filmed and they're not putting on a show. Does anyone remember Berkeley being set on fire earlier this year? Anyone? Remember the place being smashed up and all the crazy stuff? Well, I'm going to show you the reason. There's a horrific, evil man who caused protesters to riot, burn parts of school, pepper spray his fans, and set off firebombs. This guy. That's the reason. Gay, Jewish, British conservative. Milo Yiannopoulos is a speaker and author. I quoted him earlier. He prides himself in the title of provocateur by the way that he delivers his message. He wants to get a rise out of people, not to the point of destroying schools and attacking people, but he does it effectively. He has self-published a book called Dangerous, and his brand, his whole shtick is that he pokes fun at the things that people think that we're not allowed to make fun of. Another interesting identity blend is Blair White, a transgender conservative with nearly 370,000 subscribers. Her uniqueness draws in a lot of just curious followers who then stay because of her content and views. As I've said with many of the people before, uniqueness draws people in. People don't want stories from the same type of people. They want perspectives from those who have unique worldviews. Another person who offers a unique worldview, Ben Shapiro. He's an Orthodox Jew and offers a Jewish perspective and incorporates that with his news reporting on the Daily Wire. I've actually had the pleasure of meeting him in person when I was at Disneyland a few months ago. And then lastly, toward the right-leaning side, is the news style of Alex Jones and the InfoWars network. InfoWars has 2.1 million subscribers and has a unique take on the reporting. Alex Jones delivers news with fiery personality, where he gives off a tinfoil hat, conspiracy theorist, crazy uncle vibe. However, he reports with passion and dives deeper into stories that many people in mainstream media wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole. Most notably, Alex Jones has been saying for years that Hollywood is rife with sexual abuse, and everyone just passed it off as another one of his crazy theories. And here we are with dozens of allegations and tons of ruined careers, and sexual abuse in Hollywood has been a national headline for weeks. Then lastly, for someone non-political, there's Jim Sterling, a YouTuber with 605,000 subscribers. Jim Sterling hosts a weekly show called The Jimquisition, where he goes deep with investigating the industry of video games and brings shady business practices out in the light. Hearing industry lingos about conversions and monetization practices is pretty boring to most people. So he presents himself as an over-the-top, boisterous, and hyper-narcissistic man, but in a way that adds that adds life and charm to his reporting on an industry that doesn't have many watchdog journalists. To go away from people, let's take a look at some of the numbers. Here we have a graph of some of the most common news sources, for Americans in 2016. As you can see, television is the most common at 57%, online at 38%, then radio and paper at 25% and 20% respectively, which is not that popular anymore. So while it seems like TV might be sitting pretty comfortably and broadcast news might be sitting comfortably, look at the demographics. 50 to 65 plus is their primary demographic, and they might only have 20 to 30 more years of that demographic before this demographic of online takes over. So TV and their talking heads are going to have to go through some radical changes if they're going to want to keep up with the changing face of news. And, okay, there it goes. So now, since this whole entire thing has been about crazy ideas and suggestions, let's have another one. I think the public has responsibility, due diligence as it's called. News as a one-size-fits-all style isn't as effective. News needs to be more niche, more audience-focused, and needs to ask the public to collect their own information and make their own decisions. Journalism is supposed to inform the public and let them draw their own conclusions, not draw conclusions beforehand and share their thoughts with the public. Complacency of the news audience is what leads to panic and hysteria news. People read one headline about Ebola, and instantly we think we're all going to die of Ebola. But then you just read a couple of stories, and you find out it was isolated, and it was really not that huge of an epidemic. Another, also, complacency enables our favorite term of 2017. Everyone say it with me: fake news. Having news that requires the public to do their part would combat that. Read the headline, don't read the article, and instantly share it to Facebook about what a horrible tragedy this is. If you just couple that idea with this clear and obvious bias suggestion, people would be forced to genuinely interact with multiple news sources that have opposing viewpoints to reach their conclusions. So to prepare us for this not so cataclysmic apocalypse that is the post-fact era, journalism can change by making news with more personality. Less talking heads and more talking faces. As in, don't just have stories told by people, but have faces. People that are more than newscasters, telling the stories, so that audiences can understand the perspective of their news is being delivered from. Don't be afraid to be funny with news. Of course, keep it appropriate, but some press releases or news reports could be so much more interesting and keep audiences engaged if an unexpected witty joke is put in the middle of there. Next, understand what you're reporting on. Do you know why the press told us the chances of Trump winning were 2%? Because they never left the journalism office. They just waited for the next election cycle forecast and published it and went on. They never went out and talked to everyday people. So how can you trust news that doesn't have its hand on the pulse of its own country? And lastly, I stand by my earlier point. Admit bias. Make it clear and transparent. When people know where you're coming from, they know what to expect and what other perspectives they need to get to find the whole story and make their own conclusion. Journalism wants to dance around it because it's kind of written in the code of journalism, but none of us have ever read a journalistic story that has been completely untouched by another human's worldview in some way. So thank you very much for all your time and listening to this preposterous ideas about post-fact era journalism. I'm willing to field any questions if you have them.